Hello and welcome to the Homesick to Happy Movers podcast. Today we're talking with Alison, and I'm very excited for our conversation because we're talking about moving and all the things that come with a move and how to connect afterwards. Alison is a pastor's wife, a mom of two littles. She's passionate about inspiring women to take charge of their health and inspiring them to walk out their calling. Alison has also lived in 3 states in the past 4 years. With each move was to a completely new place where she had zero connections, but with intentionality, she was able to build a community in each of her new areas. So Alison, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to be able to share.
Yes. So could you share about your moving journey?
Sure. So as you shared, I've lived in 3 different states in the past 4 years. But I had a large move 2 years prior to that. And then a few years before that, I had a cross-country move when I began attending college. And so I feel like the past decade of my life has been just kind of this like rhythm of really being planted somewhere, going all in, developing relationships, and then being uprooted and having to go and start over someplace else. So yeah, that's been, I'll share I grew up in Southern California, moved to New York for college. After I was there for a few years, I met my husband who was living in upstate New York. So 6-hour drive, so completely different culture. So when we got married, moved up there, restarted there. Then his job took him from New York, upstate New York, down to Terre Haute, Indiana, which was my first experience with the Midwest. Very, very big, even bigger culture shock for me than California to New York was. And then most recently, right mid-pandemic in August of 2020, we moved here to Michigan. So that is where we are planted now.
Wow, awesome. So when you made your first big move from California to New York, do you think that was your hardest transition because you didn't have like those skills yet?
Actually, I would say that was probably my easiest transition. And that's just because of the nature of, I think, college life and the fact that you are thrown in with, you have a roommate that you're forced to learn to live with, and you have classes with people, and you're just living in community, whether you like it or not, with people. And I think that learning the subsequent moves were actually harder for me because there was none of that there. And I had to really learn how to create community without any of that help.
Yeah, without being in a place where community is easy to create.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, awesome. And then you also mentioned your culture shock from going from New York to the Midwest. Could you speak about that a little bit?
Sure. So when my husband and I first went out to Terre Haute to look at homes, about a month before we moved out there, we knew that we were probably going to be there. I broke down crying in the hotel room because I said, I just couldn't envision myself living there. It's more rural. They didn't have a Target, which may seem like a silly thing for some people, but for me, I was like, they don't even have a Target. They didn't really have much of a mall. And the nearest, I guess the nearest nicer movie theater was 40 minutes away. It was just very different for me to be in a small community as opposed to being somewhere where there's just so many people in Southern California, so many people in upstate New York, and there just wasn't in Terre Haute. So I guess it was kind of the community aspect. It was the fact that I look around and it was just fields,
yeah,
which was again, so different from the topography of Southern California and, skyline of New York. I just didn't really know how to, I was so far out of my comfort zone is what it was. And that was brand new to me.
Mhm. Yeah, it's kind of like a double whammy, being
Mhm.
out of your comfort zone, and having like these things that we expected not show up in our life,
Right.
and then also not having our connections made yet.
Yes. Yeah, completely.
Yeah, so how rural was your town? Like how big was it?
Oh goodness. So okay, I realize that rural is subjective.
Yes, yep.
To me, it was rural. Some other people might not consider it rural. I don't, oh gosh, I don't even know the number of people, but I'll say that like, um, well, I think the fact that we didn't have a Target. We had there was basically one strip. There was one main street where everything was located, and that was it. Like there was not multiple main streets. Like, yeah, I don't know how to describe it. Like I said, I could take a shot in the dark at like the number of people, but I would probably get it wrong. So
Yeah, yeah. I think that gives a really good description that there's just one main street and that's it. Because I have found myself too when I was living in Iowa,
mm,
where I just saw cornfields. And like we had this teeny tiny town, and I'm like,
uh-huh.
where are the people that I'm supposed to connect with? Like I don't see
No,
them.
right.
All I see is corn.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did life look like for you when you arrived to your new area with no connections at all?
Yeah. Um, so I learned, I think particularly with the move from New York to um to Indiana, that was the one that was probably my hardest and my most intentional because at that point in time I was a stay-at-home mom. So
Mhm.
when I had made the move, obviously I had the college with the move from California to New York, and then the move from downstate New York to upstate New York. I was still working, and so I had a job and I was able to make connections that way. And then when I moved to Indiana, I was like, oh my goodness, if I don't figure out how to meet people, I'm going to be stuck in my house all day.
Yes.
um, so yeah, I feel like that one I had to be most intentional. And so I literally remember um joining a like moms of Terre Haute group on Facebook. And I just like started messaging. I remember messaging one of the moms and saying, hey, I'm moving there. I've seen you comment on things and you seem cool. When I get there, can we go to coffee?
Yes. Yes.
So
I love how proactive you were in that you were already setting up your connections before you got there. Because I think that is key. Um, because especially being a stay-at-home mom,
right.
life is busy as a stay-at-home mom. You're busy, and sometimes I feel like moms get stuck. They get stuck
Yes.
taking care of the little kids, keeping the house up, and not actually leaving their house,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
which could be a really, really lonely state.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I'm grateful that I was self-aware enough to recognize that if I wasn't proactive, that I would get stuck in that, and that with my personality type especially, that would just my soul would slowly die if I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have those relationships and those friendships even from early on.
Yeah. So, how else did you connect when you had zero connections? You connected on the Facebook group. Were there other aspects that you used to connect in that town?
Yeah. So my husband is a pastor. And so we do, in some ways, when we've moved, we've had a bit of like forced community. But something that I think people don't often realize if they're not in the pastorate is that your church relationships are different. As a pastor, as leadership in the church, you just can't really have some of those deep friendships that you need. And so I would say, and sometimes those can develop over time, but it's just a different dynamic than it is with other friends. So I was like, we did have some people there, but it was not it was not the same, especially in the beginning, as what I was seeking and needing. And so I did the Facebook group. And then I remember from the Facebook group, somebody had mentioned about a mom's club. It was called Mothering as a Career Club, MAC, that was in the area that did like play dates and mom's night outs and that sort of thing. And so I joined that group, and I remember attending the first play date. It almost, I was like, it wasn't that serious, but at the time I felt like it was an interview, because they were like, well, come attend the play date and we'll come talk to you and decide if you can like
Oh.
join the club, which like I realize now in retrospect, like it was not, like I said, it was not that serious, but it felt like that serious. But that actually that group ended up being a lifeline for me in the 2 years that we lived there.
Yeah. Yes. I love finding local mom groups. I feel like they're so crucial if you are a stay-at-home mom for connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely.
So, would you say that creating friendship is a skill that people can learn?
Yes, I absolutely believe it is. And I recognize that I think that sometimes people fall into this trap of thinking, well, I'm an introvert, or, I'm, a homebody or something, that I can't do that. That's not my personality. And I don't agree with that, because I do believe it's a skill. I believe that we were all created for relationships, that we're all created to live in community. And it might come a little bit easier for some than it does for others, but I don't think that means that we can't work on it. And part of the reason I believe that is because I had to work on it myself. And so I have a more extroverted personality, but when it comes to meeting people for the first time, I am like very self-conscious and awkward. And I really had to work hard I had to be more desperate for relationship than I was afraid of what people would think of me. And so I think that, and as I wish that I could say that I only had one move and I developed this community and it was great, but I had to do that over and over. Like the number of people that I have messaged, not knowing them at all, and ask, kind of awkwardly asking them like, hey, you seem like we could be friends. Do you want to meet and hang out sometime? It's hard, but it has gotten easier because like I've done it before. I'm like, I've done it before. I can do it again. Send the text, send the Facebook message, hit send before you can erase it. And I do think that it's something that we can develop.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. And I love what you said about you have to be more desperate than self-conscious about what people are going to think about you. Because I believe when you're moving into a new community, there is a time where you can dip down deep into loneliness. And if you don't choose that, like, connection is more important than me worrying about being awkward, or like worrying that I don't show up awkward to somebody else. Connection is more important. And when you make that choice, because it's a choice,
right,
it can really change the trajectory of how you connect in that town.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you've had, multiple moves, and with moving, it also means saying goodbye to some of those friends, which is hard. What has saying goodbye looked like for you?
That's definitely been the hardest part of the moves, is leaving the community behind. And oftentimes I've kind of found that the 2-year mark, I feel like, is when the friendships really start to deepen. Yes. And that has ironically been about how much time we've spent in each place. So as we've moved, it's always felt like, oh my goodness, I'm finally really starting to feel at home and rooted here. And this is when we're having to pick up and leave again. And so, it's been really difficult to say goodbye to friendships, especially those that feel like they're really just starting to bloom. Yes. And long distance friendships are different. They're just different than local friendships are. But I still have close friends that I keep in contact with from Southern California, from New York, from college, from upstate, from each of those places that we've been. I do have a handful from each place that I have stayed in connection with. And I think one thing that I've learned that I've had to just come to terms with on my own is the fact that as you start to get more involved in where you're at the moment, you begin to have less capacity and less energy to keep up all the long distance friendships that you have left over from the last place. So like I would move and a lot of those friendships would remain long distance and then they just start to trickle off. And I had to become okay with that and recognize that it's not about, how good our friendship was. It's not about the fact that they don't like me anymore or anything like that. It's just this, sad reality that we only have so much capacity and so much energy. And if I really want to build a community locally where I'm at now, which I believe is most important, long distance friendships are wonderful, but we do need a community of people who are local to us and can live in our everyday lives, then I'm going to have to be okay with letting some of these other friendships be less, have more time go in between the times we contact each other and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not that those friendships are less important, but they look different.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
That is something that I also struggled with when we were doing repeated moves. And at first I didn't realize that they had to look different. And I think it can actually bring some strain to a friendship is trying to keep it like what it was.
Yeah. That's
so what ways do you continue to stay connected to the people that you've moved away from?
I'm super grateful for like Facebook and Instagram, social media that allows me to keep up with them just, a few seconds a day just by seeing what they're posting. Obviously it's harder with the handful of close friends that I have who aren't on social media. Sometimes I wish they were, and it takes more intention to text and to have those conversations. I love FaceTime. So I usually try to schedule, there's a handful of long distance friends that I would say we try to schedule once a month or once every other month for longer FaceTime conversations. But a lot of text messaging and a lot of just checking in with people and keeping up to date on what's going on their lives on social media.
Yeah. Awesome. I feel like the variety that you have going on is really good. Like text messaging, calls, FaceTime, social media, you got it all, which is good. Because sometimes those varieties, like one friend will respond better to a text versus one friend will respond better in social media.
Totally. Yeah.
So you also help women walk out their calling. And could you share with us, like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So I would say that this is something that has kind of been it keeps coming up in my life where I have these opportunities, and I have such a heart and a passion for women, and especially young women, to actually step up and realize the vision that they feel like God has given them for their lives and for the areas that they desire to walk out their faith and to help other people. And so it has looked different in different seasons. I've done a lot of mentorship all throughout the years in the different places that I've been. I usually try to put myself in places where I have opportunities to mentor. And so when I first moved to upstate New York, I really wanted a job at a Christian college because I wanted to be able to develop relationships with the students there, which I was able to do. And so, yeah, I would say that is kind of, again, it looks different. I'm actually coming into a transition with my current job at this church where I'll be able to live a lot more tangibly into that as well. And I can't say too much because it's not like public yet, but I'm really, really looking forward to being able to really do that in a tangible way. But I would say that even something like this, where an opportunity to encourage women to step out and to do the things that are uncomfortable, like so much of that has to do with women living into their calling.
Yes, yes. I love that, doing things that are uncomfortable. Do you think people's calling is usually in a place that's a little bit uncomfortable for them?
Oh yeah, I think that God likes our callings to stretch us. I
Yeah.
think that they're things that make sense. I don't think that they're out of the blue type things, but I think that they're things that just cause us to go a little bit further than maybe what we would feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of growth that goes hand in hand with that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So women walking out their calling
Mhm.
and developing a friendship of or a community of friends, I feel like goes hands in hand. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts about that?
No, I completely agree, because I think that we need people cheering us on. We need people who know us to call out what they see in us. And we have to let people in order for people to be able to do that for us. And so, yeah, I would say that developing a community and developing friendships is probably one of the best ways that we can really step into our calling, is just allowing people to have influence in our life, allowing people we trust to have influence in our lives and to encourage us and build us up in the ways that we need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like allowing people in, because sometimes it is our choice where we kind of put up this wall. We can't see it, but like to protect ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it doesn't actually protect ourselves. It keeps us from building those awesome relationships that we could.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what advice do you have for listeners who are preparing for a move?
Be proactive is the best advice I can give. Be intentional, be okay, like we said earlier, with being uncomfortable, and recognize that I think sometimes people think or hope that community will just like naturally happen. And most of the time it won't. And we have to make that decision and take that step to make it happen. And also that I'll say, like, the people who became my friends, a lot of times it wasn't a right off the bat friendship. Sometimes it was kind of like a really awkward first date that you just had to be willing to, like, they're not a horrible person. It was just awkward, but that just happens when you're, spending time with somebody for the first time. And so being willing to like push past that and, give the person another 2 or 3 times to hang out and see if your friendship continues to develop, and just not allowing, one awkward conversation or one, quote unquote bad first date to keep you from continuing to pursue those friendships.
Yes, awesome. I love all of that advice. So for the people who are listening right now, how can they connect with you?
Yeah. So I am most present on my Instagram, which is intentionally _Alison Strange. So Alison Strange, my name. I do have a website that is updated infrequently, which again is just my name, AlisonStrange.com. And then you can also find me on Facebook. But I would say Instagram is where you'll see me the most, and the most of my kind of day-to-day things.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Alison, so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a really good conversation.
Thank you. I've so enjoyed it. Thank you again for letting me be here.
Yeah.